When I look at our history, I realize that our history is not negotiable. It's not defined by slavery. It is a profound history, and we need to teach it in honesty. Good evening, good evening. Hello and welcome everybody to the Erudition Network. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm happy to be here and happy to be back. This is I was just gonna say it's a premiere episode in some ways because I have been off for a couple of weeks now for many different reasons. But we are here. We are live on YouTube, and I want to thank you for joining us for our deep dive into history tonight. I'm not going to bloviate or really go too much longer or talking about anything. I just want to say thank you all who have followed us, who are still watching some of the older episodes and have stayed with us. Tonight, I'm going to tackle a big, heavy topic, something that it's been on my mind for the last couple of weeks, and I wanted to come back and really talk about this because I think it resonates with where we are today and what is going on with us. And so I want to talk about it. And today we're going to talk about how false and racist ideas about the Black community, about Black people, have been constructed through history. We're seeing even today lies and fallacies that are being thrown out there that are affecting us even right now in our current state. And we want to talk about how these old lies still affect us. I hope that this episode is eye-opening to some of you. If you're new to this program, because I haven't been on for a couple of weeks, this is an interactive program. So if there's anything that you want to talk about that about the subject that we're on, feel free to chime in into the comments. Let me tell you, I want you to subscribe. We want everybody who watches this, take a moment, subscribe to the channel. You'll be glad that you did. You're going to learn a lot of hidden history. You're going to learn factual history, things that you can go back and check for yourself and learn more. What we try to do with this interactive is give you a primer, something where you can start your journey and come back and ask questions and learn more. But I want you to be factual. Before we jump in, let's make this as interactive as we can from the start. It's a new thing I want to do. Here's a question for you. What do you think is the most egregious or damaging myth ever spread about Black people? What is your personal idea of the most damaging myth that you think has been spread about Black people? Is it the idea that they're intellectually inferior? Is it that they are morally cursed, as some have used the Bible to say? Is it that they are sexualized, naturally violent? All of these different things that we are. But what do you think is the most egregious or most damaging? And I want you to share those thoughts as if you're watching this live with a few people that I have on live, or if you watch the recording of this, please share it, put it in the chat, put it in on YouTube, and let us know. Because throughout the show, I'm going to be asking you questions because I want you to be interactive and I want you to challenge the things that are being taught and said. And we're going to trace things from where they came from to where they are right now and why, and hopefully answer the question as to why they persist, why they are still going. I like this program to challenge everyone who watches it, everyone who is listening, so that you can start to think about history in a very interactive way. Think about how it echoes in your current life, in today's society, how it affects you. And as we go through these things tonight, the points that I'm going to cover, I want you to end up trying to tie them together and have that better understanding. And I promise you, by the end of the episode, you'll see that there are connections as to why people act the way they do. They have the ideas that they do, why they hold on to these old falsehoods, why they still grapple with them, and whether it be in our politics, in our religion, in our education, in our psychology, because these things are affecting us even now. So as we go through this, I want you to think about that. Think about the interaction, being interactive and tying things together. That makes this program exciting for me, and it makes it something that you can learn from. So as we set this stage on fallacies and lies placed on black people, we have to consider that basically the big lies that have been used to justify oppression, slavery, murder, these lies have roots in every dynamic of our lives. You will see that preachers, scientists, politicians, teachers, and I like to look at it in their own words, why they felt that way, and what did they say to instruct others. Tonight, we're going to go over those words. We're going to go over those people. We're going to talk about some of those things. And I promise you, because history is what it is, I will not sugarcoat it. I'm not going to make it affable to you. I want you to understand why it is important. Because if we confront these things, we can understand them. And we can understand how wrong they are even now. That sounds good to everybody? The 2 or 3 people that I have on tonight and those who will join us later? All right, let's move on. I want to talk about first, because I think you have to look at the faith-based ideas of it. You have to look at how racist, bigoted people chose to manipulate the Bible, particularly, to lie. To lie. And if you understand how deep that lie goes, think about how old the Bible is. We call it the good book. People call it the good book. So if you take things from the good book and you weaponize them, then to justify racism, then you can attack people or get people to attack others through faith. How many of you heard of something called the curse of Ham? I'm sure you have. If you're a Christian and you've been to church, but I'd ask you to drop a comment in there saying at least that you heard about it or that you know about it. And if you haven't, then you're going to learn something tonight. But the curse of Ham is one of the earliest and most egregious religious justifications for enslaving Black people. It was a way for slave owners to use the Bible to justify what they did to Black people. The story comes from Genesis 9th chapter, the 18th to the 27th verse. In the Old Testament, it tells how Noah got drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. And his son Ham saw him naked. Noah then, per what racists tell you, then cursed Ham's son Canaan to be a servant of servants to his brothers. Now, if you're saying to yourself, what does it have to do with Black people? Then let me go further. It was a way to show that the Hamites, who were dark skinned, right? They were cursed to be in slavery. They were put there biblically to be in slavery. But that inherent idea of using the Bible to manipulate slave owners and racists twisted that story. They dropped the actual target of Canaan and claimed that Ham himself was cursed, and that Ham was the ancestor of African people. So that meant that African people were cursed. And in this distorted racist view, that meant that being black became equated to being in servitude, to continually be under someone's foot. The curse of Ham myth taught that God ordained that black people should be slaves to others. It was a blatant lie, but it was something that was manipulated in scripture, in theology, bad theology, and then pushed through history. And it spread like wildfire because it was convenient among those who wanted to justify slavery, who wanted to justify putting people in bonds. And if you think about how powerful it is to use religion and a narrative in that way, it feeds into people's faith. And it instructs them in their churches, in their place of recourse, that the black people in their lives are cursed to be servants. And it justifies their cognitive dissonance that enslaving them isn't cruel. No, you're only fulfilling the word of God as your preacher, teacher, or whatever taught you. And so this outright racist religious propaganda became a baseline for people to hold on to that. Slave Bibles misused this to teach blacks themselves that they should be in perpetual slavery. And it wasn't the only verse in the Bible, but it was, or the only verses in the Bible that did that, but it was a strong setup. Another favorite of slave owners, they love to quote lines like Ephesians 6:5. Servants, obey your masters with fear and trembling, as unto Christ. They pointed this out that Jesus never, explicitly condemned slavery. And so that meant that slavery was okay with Christ. To them, the Bible implicitly condoned their ability to be over blacks and treat them as servants. And by extension, they claimed that the slavery of black people was in fact a part of a divine order that had to be adhered to. They completely escaped the idea of love and equality and the other things that Jesus talked about, because it was better to cherry pick a verse to prop up something as brutal as chattel slavery that included murder, destruction, rape. But it was okay because the cherry pick verses that they used allowed them to get away with that. If you were to listen to the voices of, and I pulled some ministers in the mid 1800s, around the time of the Civil War, people like Bishop William Meade of Virginia. In the mid 1800s, he told enslaved people that even if they were punished unjustly by their masters, they should accept it because it's what God wanted them to do. Because maybe they had done other sins that God was punishing them for, and that the savagery of the African justified it. Meade preached that if a slave is whipped for something they didn't do, perhaps God saw you doing something that others didn't see. So it was justified, even though the law said that slaves could be killed while being disciplined. This was a bishop. Can you imagine? A bishop basically said, even if you suffer, it's for your own good, and God will make it up to you later. So just take the beating to get away from your savagery. We talk about gaslighting today, but that was early gaslighting that was taught to slaves. This is what the church in America believed. Another bishop, Stephen Elliott of Georgia, he actually praised slavery as a tool of providence. In 1861, he argued that attempts to interfere with slavery might just be going against God's plan. It's nonsense, but this is what he believed. He noted that missionaries, he thought about the missionaries in Africa had only converted a few souls. And he said that small number in comparison with thousands, named millions, who are now on their way to heaven through the means of slavery, because slavery purged the savage out of them. He believed that millions of Africans were being educated under slavery here on earth so that they could be servants in heaven. This was a way to control people's thoughts through religion. And it wasn't just the slave. This was being taught to the parishioners who went to the church. Being enslaved in their minds sets you up as a Black person to at least be able to enter the kingdom of heaven as a servant. You still weren't even equal in heaven. And his thought on that was that slavery was helping Black people by exposing them to the Christian civilization. It rings into the early conquistador idea of them saying that they were bringing religion to the savage. And it's something that continually happens in our history. And I'm not saying that all Christians believe this. In fact, we know from history that a lot of Christians opposed it. Abolitionists and others opposed it. But there were pro-slavery theologians who pushed this idea and gave slaveholding in the South what we still see their moral rationale by telling them for generations that the Bible says it's okay, even good and needed, to keep Black people in chains. They wrapped oppression in the fallacy of holy robes and holy thoughts. And it was distorted. It didn't agree with genuine Christian ethics. It didn't agree with the Bible in its whole. People give Frederick Douglass a hard time, but Douglass saw the hypocrisy firsthand, and he talked about it. He talked about it and he wrote about it because he saw that Christianity was being used to control. And he wrote, between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. To be the friend of one is to be the enemy of the other. I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. So I therefore have to reject the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, murderous, cradle-plundering, abusive, hypocritical Christianity of America. That's what he said. And he put them on blast so that they understood this is not of God. This is of man. They read the same Bible, but chose to go their own direction, their own understanding. That is how religion was used. Have you ever thought about it? Let's ask this question as interactive to the audience. Have you ever thought about how many people tell you that the white man taught you Christianity? How many people out here have said and lied because history doesn't support that? The African knew of Christianity, Islam. It knew of Abrahamic religions well before the white man ever told him. And so when you look at these quotes, you should have a shiver and realize, wow, this is why it's important to know your history and know your faith and the history of your faith. Because if you don't, you fall subject to this foolery, this propaganda on either side. For those of you who like to deny the African inclusion in the Abrahamic religions, whether it be Islam, whether it be Christianity, whether it be Jewish faith. But people use, and I agree with you, Dustin, it's horrible to use the grace of God to manipulate the purpose of slavery, but this was done. And today, we're still facing people who are led astray by this. These racist religious ideas did not vanish after slavery. The curse of Ham stuck around well into the 20th century. And today we still hear people talk about it. Up until 1978, the Mormon church still barred black men from its priesthood. And one of the main reasons that was given by the Latter-day Saints leaders was that black people carried the mark of Cain, or the curse from the Bible. And though they've changed that policy and officially disavowed those racist teachings, it existed. In South Africa, in apartheid South Africa, the white Dutch Reformed Church used Bible verses to defend the separation and subjugation of black people, and at times the murder of them, and telling them that God literally separated the races at Babel and he wanted them to stay apart. And so killing people and keeping people away was only in following what God wanted. In American South Africa, and even when you look at just before and after the Civil War, going into Jim Crow, segregationists and racists all over the world like to cite Acts 17:26. God made all nations and determined the bounds of their habitation. Because they wanted to claim that God assigned races to different regions, areas, and didn't want them mixing. And they argued it and fought for it and killed for it. And when we say to ourselves, no, that doesn't exist, even today, there are groups who believe that. The Christian identity movement, who believe that non-white people are literally cursed or inferior in God's eyes. That's their theology. And though it may be rejected by some of the mainstream church, it shows the endurance of the myths, some of the myths that we talked about, but not all of them, because there are many more, but I can't get into it all tonight. Telling us that Christianity is a white man's religion and that Africans have been saved by European intervention, ignoring the fact of how many blacks and brown people are in the Bible. Messing with perceptions that black people as kids, I know because I was one of them, don't realize when they look at the Bible or read the Bible that you're talking about people of color. This is what led people to depict Africa as a backward and unintellectual continent that had to be changed and saved. And it echoes those bishops. Today, in our modern politics, in our modern world, no one really comes out and says black people are cursed by God. But whenever you hear someone suggest that racial inequalities are part of some natural order or even God's plan, or that's how things were meant to be because that's how they are, alarm bells should go off in your head. The idea that you have to change racial power dynamics because if you allow it to go the way that it does, DEI and equality, that is going against God. You may be shocked, but this still shows up. I just saw a nationalist preacher say something similar on YouTube just recently. This wasn't created in a vacuum. And it creates an ongoing distrust between black communities and white dominated communities and churches. And it separates people because it's based on your faith, on your faith and belief in God, something very sacred to people. Again, I'm going to ask you as an audience, I'm trying very hard to keep you all interactive. Have you ever heard someone comment, YouTube, in your presence, church, online, hinting that segregation and racist hierarchy is biblical on either side? And how did that make you feel? How does that make you feel? Do you share the Frederick Douglass mentality that true faith should inspire equality and justice, regardless of color of skin? Religion had to be something that we talked about first on here because it is deep and it's still affecting us today. People are basing their bigoted, racist, ignorant views, whether they be black, whether they be white, whether they be whatever, off of an understanding of God that has been manipulated for hundreds of years. If you're with us tonight, let me know you're here. It's my first time back in a couple of weeks. Let me know you're here. Thank you, Dustin, for chiming in. Let me know you're here and you're listening. You got some thoughts on what we're talking about tonight. I greatly appreciate it. Sin has no bounds from the beginning. I agree with you. I agree with you, fam. I agree. Of course, after all, religion is just a means to get closer to God in some way. And if you believe you're getting closer to God by being separatist, bigoted, racist, and that's what you've been taught, think about it. Some people from a child on up, It's dangerous. Let's move on to something else. Let's talk about science. Science is another way that people are manipulated because everybody's not necessarily religious. But some people believe that they are intellectual and scientific. And so pseudoscience and scientific racism has to be discussed also. If you use the Bible to claim Black people are spiritually or inherently destined for servitude, and everybody's not religious, but let's talk about the scientists. In the 18th and 19th centuries, what we found was pseudoscientific racism. This is where people who were enlightened told themselves during the age of reason that some very unreasonable people were involved in society. And they created this idea of race. And it's tragic because at the same time as Western science started to have huge leaps in biology and physics, scientists were also, and these so-called pseudo-intellectuals, were pushing the notion that Black people were biologically inferior, despite history showing the opposite. And then they tried to use science to prove racist assumptions that they already believed. They didn't use science in the way that it should to have a hypothesis that could be wrong or right. They already came in it with the idea of what they thought it was. In the 1700s, European thinkers started systematically classifying humans in what we now call race. And they were so obsessed with categorizing the natural world, plants, animals, and people that they leaned to their understanding and their bias and their racism. They weren't unbiased observers. They wanted to prove that they, not those who came before in Africa, but they were the lead-ins. In my book, 101 Black History Questions, I talked about a man named Carl Linnaeus. Carl Linnaeus is important because he's the one that classified species. He also classified humans in what we call Homo sapien Africanus and Homo sapien Europeanus. And he assigned stereotypical traits, some of the ones we still see today, the big noses, the different, the crafty, lazy, careless idea, the European as being smart and inventive. Yeah, he wrote this. His other followers, like Johann Blechbeck, came up with the hierarchy of races and decided that races had a hierarchy to them. He's the one who coined the term Caucasian for the white race, right? Which he strangely considered to be most beautiful and original form of humanity. He called the Caucasian the apex of humanity. So in the 1700s, we had the first stirrings, but it wasn't the end. By the 1800s, it really kicked into high gear because we started to get, during this period, a wave of men who called themselves scientists but were really racist. And they started to try to use math and measurements and theories to prove that people of African and Asian descent were an inferior breed of humanity. Some went so far as to call them beasts. They measured skull sizes, they studied faces, they concocted these strange theories about sexual size. And all of these things seeped into the public and started to justify why we should treat others falsely with inequality. They did things and made statements that we look right now, we'd be like, whoa, that was horrible. But those statements still have a connection to today. Pseudoscience was ugly. It was as ugly as religious bigotry, and it was dehumanizing. Let's talk about one of our founding fathers, the famous Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was a slave owner, and he liked his slaves, maybe sometimes too much. And he was wrestling with the contradiction between liberty ideas and his lifestyle. Jefferson, in some ways, came off as enlightened for his time, but he harbored racist views that are evident in his writing that we don't talk about. In his 1785 book, you can go online and go look for it. I didn't tell you all tonight. I usually tell you, get a notebook, write things down. Notes on the state of Virginia. Jefferson devoted a whole section where he speculated about Black people's innate characteristics. He compared Black Africans to whites on various traits, and he wrote them down. Jefferson wrote, comparing them by their faculties of memory, reason, and imagination, it appears to me that in memory they are equal to whites, in reason much inferior, and that in imagination they are dull, tasteless. I advance it, therefore, as a suspicion only that Blacks are inferior to the whites in the endowments of both body and mind. That's what he wrote. He even doubled that, right? When he said that Black people could comprehend scientific theories and claimed that Black people felt love or desire, but it was not refined, and that it could border on lust. If you read Jefferson's work, he labeled Black people as naturally less rational, less emotional, inferior intellectually, and sexually duplicitous. Same man who wrote all men are created equal didn't see that in Blacks and was not referencing Blacks when he said men. He was only impressed once when the mathematician Benjamin Banneker, one of the people who worked on the project for Washington, D.C., sent him an almanac. And Jefferson wrote back saying, nobody wishes more than I do than to see these such proofs. Because he had already calculated in his mind that Blacks couldn't think like that. And then tried to justify, well, maybe Banneker had white in him. These are scientific thoughts that they wrote down and believed. In Europe, Georges Cuvier, who is considered a brilliant French naturalist, in 1817, he described three major races. Of course, he had to put at the top the Caucasian, the Mongolian, and the Ethiopian. The Ethiopian meaning Black people. And when he ranked them, he blatantly ranked them like that. For Caucasians, he went along and said that they were the most beautiful and superior, genius, courageous. But when he wrote about Blacks or the Ethiopian, he said the Negro race is marked with Black complexion, crisp woolly hair, flat nose, the large penises, the lower parts of their face and thick lips show that they may be more of a monkey, approximate to a monkey or monkey tribes. That's what he wrote. Because we can't allow people to think that Africans are human. Even though if we go back, and this is why I write a lot about early world history, the Africans saved Europe many times over before any of these men ever existed. But a leading European scientist claimed that Black Africans' physical traits show that they were of an ape tribe, probably a primate. And he based it on scientific thought. We still today hear people making this disgusting like a monkey comparison. We still hear folks do this. It's a common racist trope. It was used in the minstrel shows. It was used in cartoons. It's thrown in Black slurs about athletes. We still see it on social media. We've had people canceled from Courage Culture because they use it. People are still throwing bananas at Black soccer players. 200 years after Covey, they're still using the pseudoscience that he offered to dehumanize Black people. It's sad, but it is what it is. Anybody hear a story as you look back? Can you name one African scientist who collected data to prove white superiority? Can you name one African scientist who took evidence to prove Black superiority? No. Because it would be seen as pseudoscience if they did it. But in those times, the 1900s, a man named Samuel George Morton, who many of you should know, pushed this idea of craniology, the study of skulls, right? And wrote books like The Crania America, where he took indigenous people and Black people's skulls and tried to prove that they were inferior by the shapes and styles of their skulls. And to this day, there are still people who read those books and think he was right. It's scary, but it's true. And when I talk to people and they say, well, you know, pseudoscience is pseudoscience. No, it's not. Because those books are still there. People still read them. They still don't go and disqualify the science. When you tell people that they have diseases that make them prone to being enslaved, a man named Dr. Samuel Cartwright in 1851 said that they have a disorder that makes them want to be enslaved. On and on and on and on. And as we come forward in history, as we look through the 1800s, as we come to where we are today, we're still seeing these parallels. Whenever you hear arguments about racial differences in IQ or racial differences in the natural way that people are shaped, you're hearing an echo of scientific racism. In the 1990s, there was a book called The Bell Curve, and it set up a lot of controversy suggesting that genetic IQ differences among races. It repackaged a lot of old ideas, pseudoscience ideas, to suggest why Blacks weren't doing well on tests. And when it was later proven to be wrong or a lie, people are still buying that book. The human genome, the genome, doesn't have separate subspecies. Differences between two individuals are so tiny. The genetic variations are so small, and within even our racially divided groups. And we know that from current science. Yet, these public misconceptions remain. These people still see it as something wrong. We are human beings across the board, and we choose our separations. When you tell me that a Black person was built for athletics, but not academics, right? When you tell me that an Asian person is more academic, you're buying into these pseudoscientific ideas. When you take the idea, let's go even current, when police departments or authorities justify racial profiling by suggesting that Black people are more naturally more violent or crime prone biologically, it's an insinuation based on old tropes. And they are traced back to people like Cartwright and others. Criminologists today should be dismissing these links, but too many of them lean into it. Crime is really about a social context. It has nothing to do with skin color. You put someone in a social environment, regardless of whatever color or race you want to assign them, whatever is going on in their environment. That's why people who are killed a lot of times are killed by folks that they know. But when we assigned it to a racial trend, we go right back to these old tropes. When you look at these things, it should affect you. When we associate African people to apes and animals and cartoons and slurs, we say it's ghastly, but at the same time, too many of us still lean to it, even within our own cultures. The darker skinned Black person against the lighter skinned Black person. I want you to think about that. Think about a time you heard someone cite a statistic, a study, an idea, and they generalized it with race. Did you question them? Did you say, hey, who did this study? What was this based off of? Did you ask them to go back and look at people like Wilcox, who wrote a lot of the statistics studies from the early 1900s all the way up into the 1960s that were basically written with racial bias? Now you should. Now you should ask these questions when someone brings this up. Because these things are important and they are things that we should be talking about. Let's go a little bit further here. We always have to get into the Civil War because the Civil War is the cornerstone or the height, to some extent, of supremacy. By the 19th century, the United States was torn over slavery. Abolitionists, Black activists, people were talking about how things had gotten out of control. Folks were trying to debunk the idea of Black inferiority. They were trying to say that there was no difference. Yet, there were those who fought against that. I would ask you guys to go look up Senator John C. Calhoun. Calhoun in history, pre-Civil War in South Carolina, was a despicable character. He was the one that said that slavery was a positive good. Because see, if the whites had a master and slave relationship that benefited both, whereas the whites were civilizers, that meant that Black people were getting guidance like children. Calhoun believed that in any society, one part must serve the other. Just so happened that his side of it were those who were supposed to be served. He believed that. This was a man who served as vice president. But he articulated racism and really truly believed everything that he said. Everything that he said. When Southern states seceded to form the Confederate States of America, they knew that they were fighting for slavery. I don't care what historians try to tell you with states' rights, because that's the lie. As Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, gave the Cornerstone speech, It's called that because he laid out what the cornerstone of the new nation was supposed to be about. And if you pay attention to his words, he's not talking about states' rights, right? This is the vice president of a would-be country explicitly citing why this new nation had to be made. He said, our new government's foundations are laid, its cornerstones rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination of the Negro by the superior race of whites is the natural and normal condition of mankind. What they believe. Today, we're told all of these lies about states' rights and all this other stuff, but that's what they believe. Stephens was a man of his time. Later on in that speech, you can go pull it up, he invoked the Bible to back up his point, referencing the stone that the builders rejected becoming the cornerstone, implying that there was divine favor put on pro-slavery people, that God willed it. He believed that. And so when we look at this idea of slavery and the lies that are told, people talk about states' rights and all this other stuff, but you don't have to do that. Go look at what they said. They gave you scientific, philosophical, religious ideas of why they did it. And everyday life was affected by that. It justified the capture, the possession, and the murder of Black people. It's the reason why they kept books away from them, because they knew an educated Black person would question it. You hear people say that education, in some of their writings, corrupted Black people. A white supremacist named James Vardaman, who became the governor of Mississippi in the early 1900s. Vardaman said the only effect of Negro education is to spoil a good field hand and make an insolent cook. And that can go on and on and on. They didn't want you to learn, and they didn't want you to understand that you could be equal. They didn't want you to learn about African history, world history, any of that. And that resounds with what we're talking about today. What's wrong with people knowing history? What's wrong with people knowing facts? If you show intelligence, what makes you corrupt? They believed then that a Black person should know nothing more than to obey and follow. They wanted the happy slave, happy to be fed, happy to do around, childlike and running around and just serving. And then they told them you couldn't handle freedom because you children. That's what they believed. And they wrote books about it. They taught lessons about it. Post-Civil War, the revisionist lessons were about this South where the childlike slave was happy to be enslaved because he was fed and taken care of. I would ask you guys tonight, before we talked about it tonight, did you ever hear about the Cornerstone speech? Have you ever heard about it? Is this the first time that you're actually hearing about the Cornerstone speech? When people tell you that it's about states' rights. Many Americans have not been taught these things. And it's a shame because it shows us how much has been hidden from us to keep us divided. It's the same thought that told people that the flag of the Confederate flag was heritage, not hate. No, this is all about us saying we want our state. When from their very mouths they told you. So again, we are falling into this lie. This lie that has kept us away from each other. And then you ask yourself, what does that have an effect on us today? Well, let's think about it. The end of slavery followed a century of legal discrimination. And a lot of that is still with us today. There are gaps in wealth and educational opportunities and how we live in our neighborhoods, how we interact with each other. When we talk about debates about Confederate statues or Confederate flags, because we haven't been taught the history fully, because we've erased the public memory. We've taken away the idea of what that supremacy actually meant to both whites who were against slavery and blacks. Those who were killed, murdered, terrorized. And yet, we're still facing a lot of these things. And we have a tacit under acceptance of some of these racist ideas. And when we say, hey, that offends me, people say, oh, no, that shouldn't offend you. Politically, we're still seeing it today, too. The failure of Reconstruction and the rise of Jim Crow established this horrible pattern of Black disenfranchisement in voting and how we interacted with society. And though we can say, well, no, all of that stuff was started to be outlawed in the 1960s. But we're still seeing voter suppression and tactics. And let's understand something. This is not just on blacks. Right? And it was never just on blacks. You will go back in history and find that when we look at the Wilmington coup, how they went in and they attacked, whipped, beat, and in some cases murdered whites who agreed with treating people equally. The old underlying fear is that if black people have voices truly equal to white voices in democracy, then some kind of order is disturbed, is threatened. It's the same thing that the Confederacy was talking about with their sandy foundations and their idea of keeping people down. They don't want a foundation that is equally set and solidly set. Some people just want to watch the world burn. Even in our own lives. How many of you have encountered a relative or someone who says something that's like, I don't mind black people, I don't mind white people, but I wouldn't want my daughter or somebody in my family marrying one, or I treat them with a certain distance. Because we still have people who don't see an equality there. I thank God that it's becoming less in younger generations, but it hasn't vanished entirely. These ideas of black men and as violent criminals, horrible people that are only out to kill you, they're brutes. And if we go back and we look at the 20th and 19th and 20th century representations, and you know what's sad is that over time, as you tell people this, as you push a societal understanding on them, some people believe it in their own cultures. And then we paint with a broad brush and we treat everybody with suspicion that was crafted in a very racist time. And then people always ask, okay, that's true, but how do we change these deeply embedded ideas? What we're doing tonight. Being aware of your history, being aware of where we come from. Because it will cause you to challenge these knee-jerk reactions that we have. These propaganda-infused decisions that we make. The fear you feel when a black person approaches you and he's minding his own business. Ask yourself why you feel this way. Ask yourself why you think that people of a certain cultural background, racial background, deserve your animus. When in reality, they've done nothing to you. I'm not going to go too far tonight. I just wanted to touch on those things and give us some examples. And we didn't get through all of them because there are political issues too. There are physiological issues that we face. We can talk about the divine curse or God willed it. We can talk about the biological inferiority, the happy servant that needed a master, right? All of these things that we talked about tonight, criminality and the savage nature that we assign to other cultures based on historical teachings that we know are false. The lie of the laziness and poor and bad work ethic, even though you see people of all colors out here working every day to feed their families and do everything they can. You don't look at the Appalachian poor white person that they call hillbilly, that was offensive to them for a very long time, and consider them to be anything. But you will call a black woman a welfare queen. You will call a black person a lazy, shiftless man that doesn't take care of his family. And you will ignore all of the history and lies that went into that. Despite the amount of people of color who have degrees and education and run businesses, people go along with the anti-intellectual motif. The ideas of Thomas Jefferson. And we don't ask, why do they think that way? With all of the black inventors and doctors and Nobel laureates, people like George Washington Carver, Charles Drew, and on and on and on. Each racist myth has a creator, and that creator wanted to justify an injustice, whether it be slavery, colonialism, segregation, economic exploitation, political marginalization, just cruelty. They were never based on facts. It was just something that the oppressor felt he could get by doing this or putting this information out. And if you look at history and you really unpeel it, you will see the lies. But you will also see the marks that they have left throughout time and throughout our space. I'm going to leave you tonight by telling you this. Educate yourself. Confront these ideas. Look up the things that I told you about tonight. Push yourself to look for books and curricula that show factual, authentic stories. First and second source information that are not based on caricatures, tropes, to show you that it's deeper than that. And so you don't go for these quick reaction policy and ideas. Because once you do that, then you'll start asking for policy and reparative justice and ideas that can bring us together and not tear us apart. You'll start looking at the education gaps within all communities that don't teach us how many of us have stood together, how many of us have endured oppression, white, black, yellow, brown, whatever. Look at your family and get a personal reflection. What did they go through? What did they have to endure? Many of us can't even trace our families beyond the last generation. Do that. Understand what your family's interaction was, bad or good. Because what that does is it affirms to you where your generation is growing or failing. And it teaches you to strengthen yourself to do better. At the end of the day, facts are our best weapon. It's what informs us, because racism is built on lies. That's all it is. It's a lie. And it doesn't have to be intergenerational. We can be further along. We can get around these religious things like the curse of Ham or understanding the Cornerstone speech and understand why people felt that way. I'm going to get out of here. But I like to hear from all of you who watched this episode. What struck you? What stayed with you? Did you learn anything? Did you learn anything that may have changed the way you view some of the things we deal with today? Are you inspired to do something different? Do you see where some of these tropes and ideas came from now? I tried to cover as much history as I could in a very short amount of time, and I thank you for sticking with me, those who did. But I wanted to enlighten you. I wanted to show you in this episode, since I haven't been on in a while, because our aim on Erudition is not just to dump on you and make you hate each other. It's to engage, to challenge, to grow, to connect. If you find this to be enlightening, if you find this to be erudite, use these stories and use the things that we talked about tonight. Look up these names and grow. I thank all of you who are in the chat. I thank you for your thoughts, your comments. I may not have been able to read all of them, but I encourage you to continue this discussion and to share this episode, to subscribe. We are now going to be on Skool, where I will be dropping questions from these episodes that you can answer. So if you didn't write anything down, there will be names that would be put in there. Go on the Skool site. We will put a link on our pages and on YouTube. But I'm going to be doing that every week because I want you to grow. All right. So I want to leave you guys tonight, and I want to thank you for being with us. And I just want you to know, man, every one of these lies we discuss has been met by people who fought them and did everything that they could to disqualify them, whether they be abolitionists, scholars, activists, or whoever. And gradually, they did change some minds and they did change some laws. So we are not without hope. But having this conversation, you are a torchbearer. You are a person who's going to push that fact and those truths further. Dr. King said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I believe that. I hold that to be truthful. Thank you for spending your time with us on the Erudition Network. I thank you for keeping up the questioning, keep learning. I promise you I'm going to try to be here with you next week. Good night. Have a blessed rest of your weekend. And I encourage you to share and subscribe as we grow this network. You all be blessed and have a really great night. Thank you.
From Eddie K. Phillips, founder of the Erudition Network, comes 101 Black History Questions, a groundbreaking book that challenges what you thought you knew and uncovers the stories history tried to hide. Perfect for classrooms, families, and curious minds. Get the digital copy today on Amazon.